Jesus told his disciples, "There was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, 'What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be a manager any longer.' The manager said to himself, 'What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their homes.' So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' 900 gallons of olive oil,' he replied. The manager told him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Then he asked the second, 'How much do you owe?' 1,000 bushels of wheat,' he replied. He told him, 'Take your bill and make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money."
All right, so if I asked you, hey, why don't you write down in your notes right there, what is the point of that story that Jesus tells? I guarantee you we would get a dozen different answers to that. And I know one answer for sure. Someone would write, "I have no idea." Because you stopped listening halfway through because it got confusing. And so I'll be honest with you, a lot of pastors, when they teach on parables, they skip this one. Because there's a lot of scholars who just totally disagree about what it's about. Let's start this way to try and grasp what this is all about. If I could give you kind of some insider trading information on making an investment that was going to pay back thousands of percentages beyond what you originally invested, wouldn't you want to know? I mean, the answer is yes. I mean, every single one of us would go, if you could give me insider information on an investment that was definitely going to pay off, I would take it. Warren Buffett and his company, Berkshire Hathaway, in 1972, they purchased a company for $25 million. And today, it's given them an 8,000% return increase on their investment. Everybody would want to know, like, what did Warren Buffett know about in 1972? Well, he didn't. He didn't know that that would give him that kind of return. In 2018, the company made $410 million in sales for that year and had a net income of $90 million. In 1 year, you had almost 4 times the return on your original investment. Anybody want to guess at what the company was? See's Candy. Yeah. So every time you go into See's and you eat, you're like, "Thank you, Warren Buffett." And he's saying, no, thank you. Keep eating. Well, the reason I tell you that is Jesus tells a story about an investment. This parable is all about an investment. And wouldn't it be nice if we really knew that there was going to be this outcome? I mean, let's bring it home real quick. Birdland, right over here, right? Down at the bottom of the hill, we call this Birdland. Some of you don't know it's called Birdland, but all the names of the streets have bird names to them. Wren Drive. Down there, we have some people in our church that have lived down there. They were some of the original owners down there. I've heard stories of, when I bought that house back in 50-something. Yeah, I bought that for $56,000. I just went on Zillow today just to browse what the homes are worth down there. 1.1. I think there was one for 900. It's a steal. There's one there for 1.9 right now. Wouldn't it be amazing that if I could tell you there's an investment you could make today that in the end will pay dividends beyond what you could imagine? And the truth is, that's the parable that Jesus tells us in Luke 16. So here's what we're going to do today. I want to dissect this parable to say this. Are you investing in this? Because if it's really going to pay off in the end, Let's make the investment together. So open up to Luke 16. We've been in this series called Parables. There are stories that stick to the soul. And Jesus tells parables, and sometimes he doesn't explain them all, but he always tells them with the intention of getting an emotional reaction from people. He wants to get a rise out of people. He wants to prove a point. He wants to tell a story that's going to stick to him. Originally, when you read this, it says that Jesus is speaking to his disciples. And here's the parable he tells, Luke 16. There's a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer." Busted. Gig's up. Jesus doesn't say specifically how the manager was wasting the owner's possessions, but the assumption is that he's been wasting it on himself, right? We're going to see in a moment that the owner actually owns large areas of land, and more than likely, he's leasing out the land to these farmers. And they're not farmers that are just trying to scrape by and provide for their families. These farmers are probably farming hundreds of acres, and as they farm it, they're paying off a percentage. So we're asking, maybe this dishonest manager, maybe he's actually overcharging them, saying, hey, the owner, I know last year he wanted 10%, but this year he's asking for 15%, when the owner's just actually expecting 10, and maybe he's pocketing the other 5. Or maybe he's actually undervaluing what the harvest was that year on the books, and he's taking the profits for himself. We don't know exactly, but we know he's a cheat, we know he's a liar, we know that he's stealing. So verse 3, the manager said to him, "What shall I do now? My master has taken away my job, I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job, the people will welcome me into their houses." So he called in each one of his master's debtor. He asked the first one, "How much do you owe my master?" 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, make it 450. Then he asked the second, "How much do you owe?" 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. And he told him, "Take your bill and make it 800. And it might sound like it stopped here with 2 of them, but when it says he asked each one of them, it sounded like it's again and again. So I don't know if it's actually limited to just these 2. But if you take these 2 examples, what kind of discount did he give? To the first one, he gave 50%. 900 gallons of olive oil comes to about 150 olive trees in 1 year, and it's the equivalent to about 3 years' wages for an average worker. I mean, it's not just a little bit of a discount. 1,000 bushels of wheat is enough to feed 150 people for the year, and it would take about 100 acres to produce that much wheat. It's worth several years' wages, and he just says, slash it. It's no small amount. The kind of debt forgiveness is a financial game changer to these farmers. I mean, can you imagine how grateful they are? Hey, I know it's tight for you right now. I mean, just think about if you got called. Some of you may, I'm just, wondering, like maybe some of you have debt. And they called you, right? You don't pick up that call, right? But they called you into their office and they said, hey, by the way, let's just take your bill, your debt, let's just cut it in half. Could you imagine? Hey, by the way, that mortgage that you have on your house, let's just do this, okay? Let's just cut it in half. How would you feel about the guy sitting across the table from you? You would kiss him. I don't care if you're a man, you'd reach across and just kiss him. The debt forgiveness, the gratitude that's there. Now, I don't think you miss this. He didn't do it without strings attached. When he forgives that debt, he has every intention of calling what it is that they owe him. See, in this Middle Eastern first century culture, there's this culture of honor and reciprocity. Because of one person treats me this way, because of the honor in our society, I must reciprocate the gift that he gave me. They might not be thinking it at the time, but when he forgives that debt, they're like, oh my goodness, that's so great. Hey, if you need anything, you let me know. Oh, don't worry, I will. So let's get this straight. The manager of the owner's property is dishonest in at least 3 different ways. Here it is. First, he's skimming profits from the company. Second, When he was asked to go get the books so that the owner could see what was really happening, the dishonest manager, instead of showing him the real books, starts discounting all of the debt of money that's not his, that belongs to his owner. And third, he's giving these discounts with every intention of cashing in on those in the near future. So here's my question. What do you anticipate that Jesus is going to say about him? What do you think that this Jesus, this honorable Jesus, this holy Jesus, this Jesus with integrity is going to say about a dishonest manager? He's going to call him a fool. Oh, this guy's going to hell. He's going to say, hey, whatever you do, don't be like him, right? But in the next verse, in verse 8, look in your Bibles. Here's what it says. The master commended the dishonest manager because he has acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. It's not what I was expecting. I would expect that Jesus would bash him, make him out to be the loser of the story, but he doesn't. He tells a story of a dishonest guy, and he makes him the hero of the story. Did Jesus just recommend that his followers be a little bit more like the cheater? Before you leave and decide to go back to work tomorrow to manage your boss's wealth, let me walk through a couple things. First of all, scholars really struggle with this. There's disagreement about what this means. And I think sometimes there's disagreement about what it means because often parables mean one thing. And there's a lot of peripheral details around the story that I think Jesus uses for a reason, but it's not the main point. And so I want us to simmer down on the one main point this morning. So here's what we're going to talk about. Investing according to Jesus. And I'm going to give these to you, and they're going to sound almost non-Jesus-y. They're going to sound non-Christian to you, but hang with me for a little bit. Investing according to Jesus, number one, here it is. This one's very clear. Be wise, using money as a tool. Here's what he said. The master commended. Hey, way to go. Fist bump right here. Commended the dishonest manager because he'd acted shrewdly or wisely. For the people of this world, talking about this cheater, people of this world are more shrewd or more wiser in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. We'll get to who I think he's talking about when it comes to people of the light. He wasn't commending his dishonesty. Listen to that, hear this. He's not commending his dishonesty, but he's commending the fact that the manager was making an investment that would pay off in the future. Yes, he was dishonest, but he was acting shrewdly because when the money ran out and he knew the money was running out, he recognized that he was going to need people in his life. He was going to have to depend on people. So number one, be wise using money as a tool. Second thing, make people investments. Excuse me. Jesus' investing advice is this. There are people around you that you need to make investments in. Here's the text. I tell you, use worldly wealth, which is crazy because the word worldly wealth literally means this: money of unrighteousness, dishonest money. Use dishonest money to gain friends for yourselves so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. What he's saying is make people investments. And it's such an awkward way of saying it. Like, why would you say dishonest money? I'll get to that in a minute. When you find out the audience that he's really speaking to, I think it makes a little more sense. The third is this, and then we'll put it all together. Investing according to Jesus is number 3. Earn rewards that you'll keep forever. In verse 9, he says, so that when the money is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. And then he starts teaching. He says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. Whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you've not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? There is something eternally rewarding about this. So let me put this all together. Here it is. So let's put this together as a strategy for investing. Here it is. Be wise, using money as a tool to make people investments that earn rewards that you keep forever. Jesus is putting his finger on the fact that there's people in his audience that don't see money as a tool, that don't make investments in people. They make investments in themselves because they love money so much, way more than they actually love people. Take a look at how this ends. Look at verse 13. No one can serve two masters. Either you'll hate one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And it's interesting right here because this is where the audience changes. Jesus is sitting there teaching. In the beginning, what he says is his disciples. But the audience changes. Now it says, and the Pharisees who were listening in on this. These are religious leaders, religious rulers of their day. It says the Pharisees who love money heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. I mean, can you just see these guys who were in the back dressed better than everyone else, financially successful, making money off of the people. And Jesus tells this parable about a dishonest, lying cheat who's the hero of the story. And he says, this guy's wiser and sharper than the people of the light. And the Pharisees in the back are like, wait, he's talking about us. He's saying that guy who's a cheating, lying, thieving manager is better than the people of the light, better than us? And they're doing what you do when people cut you off. They're sneering at Jesus. The Pharisees who loved money heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. He said to them, think about this, said to them, Jesus is speaking directly to these religious leaders, you are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight. So here it is. I think Jesus tells a sticky story with an unusual hero. The hero would be the kind of person who the religious Pharisees would detest. And Jesus is saying that the dishonest manager is actually better than the religious Pharisees because they love money more than they love God, even though their very position as a Pharisee says they must love God. Isn't that interesting? That these people who had money, Jesus says, you actually love it more than you love God, even though you're at the greatest position of a religious authority in the land. Can you imagine being that person, hearing Jesus' story, and thinking, you just told a story about a person that we despise, and you're saying he's better than we are? Here's the point. This investment that Jesus is saying, use money as a tool to invest in people. Because in the end, great is your reward. So now that we got that straight, since this actually only ever happened in the first century where people loved money more than God, and that's no longer an issue today, we can all go home. We get this, right? Hey, listen, we're in the Silicon Valley. I hope that today you don't hear me speaking as if I don't get it. This is a tough place to make it on dual incomes. It's not an easy valley. And sometimes you land that job, you go, oh, actually it is. It's not so hard right now. But for a lot of people, it's really, really hard. It's not about even getting ahead. For some people, it's just about surviving. And I can't tell you how many people at our church have just said, you know what? I've been in the Silicon Valley for a while. I'm checking out, selling my house, or maybe they don't have a house. They've been renting here, and they're like, you know what? I'm just done. I just can't do it anymore. It's just too hard economically. And you're about to hear a parable. You're about to hear this story of Jesus where he's saying, hey, when you invest, let's make sure it's not just for you, but it's actually in the people around you. I get how hard that is to hear at times. But there's a reward that God has for us, and he promises us it to us. I have a drawer at home I have many drawers at home, one in specific that just kind of collects stuff. I don't know what it is. I bring stuff home and stuff just jumps in that drawer. It's full of all kinds of things. And one of the things it's full of is money. Not US dollars or US coins. In that drawer, I have some Nicaraguan money in there. I got some money from Israel. I'll bet you I even have some money from France. I tried to burn all that, but I think I missed some. There's some in there. There's just needless stuff, trips I've been on. And you come home and you're like, oh, I got a little bit of money in my pocket from that country. But it's so little, like, even for a Dutch guy who's cheap. Like, I'm not going to go convert it in and get my money back. Like, it just sits in the drawer. You know how much it's worth? I know there's a conversion ratio for it, but the minute I left the country, I can't take that to 7-Eleven and be like, hey, I'll get a coffee and a Slurpee and some chips. Here you go. Is that Monopoly money? No, that's from Israel. It's worthless, right? And I have them in my drawer. I actually have a bowl at home too. It's this cool silver bowl about this big. There's like elk antlers coming out of it. I think it's pretty awesome, but I just keep throwing change in there. And I know you probably have one of those jars or bowls too. And you know what other stuff ends up in there, like gum wrappers, whatever's in your pockets, you're just like doing this. You know, when I had little kids, you know what was in there? Chuck E. Cheese tokens. Like, talk about worthless. It's only actually worth something if what? If you're at Chuck E. Cheese. And then it's not so worthless. Kind of. You can at least put it in the slot and, play this little game and tickets come out, and then you can take those worthless tickets and go buy some worthless junk, right? But at least it's worth something in there. But that Israeli money, like there's a day where I left the country and then that was no longer of value. And when I step outside Chuck E. Cheese, it's of no value any longer. And I think what Jesus is trying to get to at the heart of this is you have something now in your pocket. You have some wealth to you. And there's going to come a day and a time where it literally has no other value because you left this world and went to another world. And so he's saying you need to make an investment on this side that's going to pay off on the other side. Investments. Let me speak specifically, give you a couple examples of some investments that you have made. By the way, I get really excited about teaching this. You know why? Because I know a bunch of you. I've been at this church for 18 years. I've watched you invest. I'm talking money, not just time, not just talent, but money. Let me give you an example. Our middle schoolers and high school students, they went to camp this summer. And a lot of them went to camp because of your funding. Not just you, mom and dad. I know some of you are like, I got 4 kids. They're going to camp. We're taking out a loan. At that camp, between our middle school camp and our high school houseboat camp, 6 kids made a first-time commitment to follow Jesus Christ. Their eternities were changed forever at that moment. And there's 14 more students who are like, you know what, I prayed a prayer a long time ago, but I wasn't really serious about it now, but I'm recommitting my life to Jesus Christ. There's 20 lives that are different today because you invested in it. Not just you, mom and dad, but there's a group of people. You invested in this church. When you gave to this church financially, when a basket goes around or you go online and give, that pays for a staff person who plans that, sets that up, organizes the volunteers. There's a group of volunteers. They took vacation time. They work. They have full-time jobs. They took vacation time to go drive up to Lake Shasta, sleep on the top of a hot, hard houseboat, then put their butts in an inner tube, get drugged behind a boat, slammed, and work just so students will think they're cool. And they get to be their counselor all week long. And they got a front row seat in their investment relationally into the lives of those kids, not just relationally, financially, to see a life change right before their eyes. That's an investment. We sit around every year and go, man, how are we going to get that many kids up to Lake Shasta and make that work? And there's a group of you that go, hey, I got a car. Why don't you take it? And you just loan cars. Or you say, I'll drive up there. You might not be going on the houseboat. Some of you are like, if I have a choice of sleeping on a houseboat with high school kids all week or driving, I'll drive every year. Just don't put me on that boat. There's all kinds of investments that you make that pay these unbelievable rewards. So I'll say it again, be wise. Use money as a tool to make people investments that earn rewards that you will keep forever. You know what makes me uncomfortable, though? This story, and by the way, I could go story after story about investments that you have made financially and relationally into people's lives. But what makes me uncomfortable about this story, Jesus is super clear on some things. Like invest, go for it. Don't be cheap about it, be generous about it. And there's definitely a reward when you pass from this life to the next life. But you know what he's not clear with? He doesn't say how much. Wouldn't it be easier if Jesus is like, okay, this is what it is? I know some of us gravitate towards the line, right? We're like, hey, it's called a tithe. That means 10%. It's the 10% line. You know why we want a line? We want a line so that we can just get over it, right? So we know we're on the right side of where Jesus wants us to be. So we're like, hey, I'm going to give 10% of my income. But see, the interesting thing is Jesus is like, yeah, you should. Keep doing what we used to do in the Old Testament, do the 10%. But listen, pay attention. Let joy and generosity drive your giving. Let the Spirit of God, whatever it is He says, drive your giving. So I'm kind of uncomfortable with his story that he tells because he doesn't say how much. So here's my question. How do I know that I'm actually making the investments God wants me to? Let me talk about that for a minute. It's in your notes there. Here it is. Number one is this. Allow the ambiguity. Allow the ambiguity of Jesus' how to drive a continuous deep dive into the question, am I making eternal investments in people? Just keep asking the question. I know this is weird. It's like, I just want to know, give me the number, give me the percentage, give me the bit. And well, no. What if you, as a single person, just sat down and prayed and said, God, what do you want me to do? And whatever seems to be the wise thing or whatever seems to be the thing, I'm kind of drawn towards that. I'm going to do that. I literally had someone tell me. I came into this because last night I was having this discussion with my spouse, and we were looking at this financial investment, and he literally told me, he goes, I got absolute peace on that. I was asking God last night, what should I do about this? He came up to me and just goes, it's absolutely clear what I need to do. I don't even know what he was talking about. I don't know the investment, but he's like, it's totally clear because I asked God about it. What if you leaned into your relationship with God and just said, so God, what do you want me to do? There's ambiguity in it. But you know what else is in there? There's the richness of relationship with God where you're leaning into Him and asking Him, God, what does it look like for me to follow you? Second thing, how do you know that you're making wise investments? Let me give this to you. What was the moment of truth for the guy who was mismanaging the account? It's when the owner showed up and the books were opened. Oh, this is going to terrify some of you, and some of you aren't going to like me for this, but what if you did this? What if you just opened the books with a trusted person? Hey, so here's my books. I don't mean someone else's books. I mean your books. Here's what we did last year. This is what we gave away. These are the investments that we made in people. And I don't mean just hey, give to the church or hey, give to charity. What did we do with our money that actually invested in people? Hey, parents, what did you do last year that was actually an investment in your kids? And I don't mean to be a better soccer player. I mean, what did you do financially that helped you spend time together? What did you do in that time together that was relational investment to build character, to talk about Christ? Because I'll tell you one of the challenges for me. As a pastor, when I gather my family together on Sunday nights, and that's usually a fight in and of itself, and then you get together and you're like, okay, family dinner night. Just to keep the peace sometimes is my goal. And I have great kids. I have a great wife. But there's moments where I'm like, God, how do we use this as investing time? And honestly, Sunday nights, sometimes I'm so tired, I'm just like, God, just get me through dinner. But there's moments where I just go, God, how do I build into these kids in such a way, and am I investing financially there? And then let's make super clear on this. I don't think Jesus is talking about just your family. I think specifically there's a way to actually invest in people that have less resources than us. But let me just ask you this. Have you ever opened your books to someone else? I hope the trusted person is at least your spouse. Have you ever opened it up just to look at it and go, what did we do last year? What did we give away? What investments and lunches did we make with people at church? Why not that kind of investment? I think it's scary to look at those investments. I mean, at our church, for anybody that we say, hey, if this church, you would call this church my church, and you're kind of part of that, we just say this, hey, would you sponsor a compassion kid? And there's moments where we just go, above and beyond what our family gives here, we're just like, we're going to keep giving to these compassion kids. We're on like our 5th kid or something like that. We keep losing them, or they move away, and so we keep investing in this. And so I just keep writing the letter every month, and we just keep giving. And here's the hard part. I have no idea if I'm making a difference or not. I get a letter back from a little 4-year-old girl. She's fantastic, but she's 4, and she's writing us a letter. She's never met us yet. And I don't know the eternal impact that will have. You know what? I don't care. I just feel like it is such a great investment for us to make. And so when we open the books, I'm finding things like that in our family. Third thing, I think if we're going to make wise investments, look for people right in front of you who might be a good investment. There might be financial needs, but you know how we invest in people here? We call them community groups. Why? Because we teach here on Sunday, and then during the week, you'll meet with a community group, a group of people that are the same people all the time in your group, that they're committed to loving you, they're committed to knowing you, and then they're committed to loving you even though they know you. And then as you gather together, you know what? That's where life breaks. When that medical report comes in, and you emotionally just need people to lean on, can I say this? Even when you financially need people to lean on, that those are the people who will stand with you. We want to make an investment in relationships in this church. Why? Well, because people need people. We need each other. The Christian life was never meant to be lived alone. It was designed to be lived within the context of community. Those might be the people right in front of you. Listen, can I say this? If you have already found a place in this church to belong, you walk in and people know your name. I belong. I'm here. Can I just ask you this question? If you look around this morning, are there people in this room that you go, I don't know that person, but I feel like I should make an investment in them. Would you come to my group? Or maybe even before that, hey, can we grab coffee? Are you the kind of person that walks into a church that says, I'm not here to just get, I'm here to give and make an investment in people around me? Do you know this? You're actually here because people have come before you to invest here. They've invested relationally, they've invested financially, so that this church could exist for you. And I think when we understand that, all of a sudden, we can turn around and say, God, I have received. How do I give back? How do I use money as a tool to invest in people so that in the end there's actually a reward for me? Let me just say this. How do I know that I'm making wise investments? Number 4, instead of looking back and saying, did I do anything? What if we actually look forward? For the next quarter, I don't know how many of you make budgets. I hope all of you, because if you are not making a budget, I guarantee you your money's disappearing and you're not sure where it went, right? I've had plenty of those seasons. But what if we actually reviewed upcoming season, looked at our budget, and see if we have planned eternal investments? When you budget your time, when you budget your money, are you actually investing in people? Because there's 2 budgets out there, right? One's a financial one. There's another one that's a relational one. It's called our calendar. If your calendar is just filled with work, and just filled with your family, and you're full, I know it's hard. The more precious commodity in this valley, more than money, for most of us, is time. This is one of the fastest paced places in America. And it's we all get the same amount of time. You can't create it. But can I just suggest this, that you have a budget called a calendar where you are investing your time. And just take a look. By the way, I don't say that to make anybody feel guilty or anything. I'm just saying this. I know a ton of you, and I know how you've given back to people. Let me say this to you. Number 5, don't wait for desire to do this, but create desire by investing in people right now. Here's what Jesus said. He said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. This isn't cryptic. Here's what it is. Wherever your money goes, you're going to care about that. Put your money in people. Make an investment. Can I just tell you, this last Thursday, Friday, we had the Global Leadership Summit right here in this room. And there were 40 of you that took time off work to make the investment in the leaders in this valley. We had all kinds of church leaders, marketplace leaders. There are 400 and something leaders in this room. And you came here to host them just so that they could get a good leadership conference. We had people carrying pallets of water up and down stairs, sweating it out, tearing this place down, setting it back up. They just wanted to make an investment in people. You know, when lunch is served for all of our volunteers and all of our staff that are working here on those 2 days, you know that there's a guy in our church that he's like, here's my investment. I want to cover the cost of lunch for those 2 days. And I can't even tell you, he's been doing this for so many years. No one knows it. It's just totally anonymous, but I know it. But more importantly, God knows it. I guarantee you there's a reward for that guy in that next life. And you know what's funny about it? He loves it. We don't go to him and be like, hey, this year, could you pony up again? Come on, bro. No, he's like, hey, this year, do I get to do that? And here's what's funny. I know story after story, people who have volunteered to help our crews paint buildings before. People who have given their times to landscaping homes across town so that women we may never meet have a loving home to be a part of. One of the marks of this church is an unbelievably generous church. So today I just wanted to encourage you with this. Just be wise. Be wise and use money as a tool to make people investments, because in the end, you will earn a reward that will last forever. And please don't miss this, okay? In the scriptures, it's super, super clear. There's no equality in heaven. There's not. There's different rewards. There's some that, oh, great is your reward. Whatever you've managed here, great is your reward. And there's some of you other ones that, like me, that you might get in and be like, you might smell like the smoke of hell, and you just barely made it in, right? I mean, Jesus is super clear in multiple places, like, there's a great reward for people, for the investments that you make today. So here's the guarantee. Ready? If you use money and relationship to invest in people, Jesus says that reward, I've got you. I've got you covered. And your reward in heaven will be great. Let's make it really clear of this. You're not earning your way there. It's by the mercy and grace of Jesus Christ alone and his death on the cross that paid for your sins. But getting there and being rewarded there are two separate things. So be wise. Use money as a tool. Invest in people because there's joy there and there's also reward there. Thanks for being that kind of church. But would you also do this? Would you keep asking the question, God, how do I invest? How do I invest? What is the next thing in front of me that you want me to invest in? And I think if we do that, this becomes an even more beautiful place all the time. Let's bow our heads. Let's pray. God, thanks for your word. Lord, I think you tell these stories sometimes that are just confusing enough that we have to pause and look at them for quite a while. And we've done that this morning. And Lord, I think that you're telling us that there's a worthwhile investment worth making. Thank you for the people in these seats, God, that this isn't new news to them. They've been living this out for a long time. But God, we got to keep asking this question. What do you want us to invest in? Lord, there's people in this room that feel alone and disconnected. And we need to invest. God, there's ministries in this church that need to get off the ground, and that requires an investment. God, there's people out in our city and organizations in this city that need help, and we want to be able to invest. So God, our money's not ours. We just get to manage it for a little bit, and we don't want to be crooked managers. We want to be good, faithful stewards with what you give us. So speak to us and lead us, and let our ears be open to your leadership. And if you agree with that and you want that in your life, would you say amen?